Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. Hi and welcome. We're so glad that you're here to learn about the important topic of ending human trafficking in Minnesota. My name is Stephanie Cosgrove, and I'm a Rotarian, and the Rotary Clubs of Arden Hills Shoreview and New Brighton Mounds View are sponsoring tonight. If you don't know much about Rotary, we're a global organization comprised of about 1.2 million members, and we focus on creating positive change. And of the many topics we focus on, one of them is ending human trafficking. Some logistics for tonight. So you're about to hear from 4 expert panelists, each looking at a different part of human trafficking. Once they are completed, we will formally open up the floor for questions. To ask a question, simply type your question in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We are also recording today's event. And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our moderator, Angela Davis. Angela, welcome. We are so glad that you are here. Angela comes to us from Minnesota Public Radio, where she has a weekday program focusing on various issues of public interest. And one of those will be this program on a future show. Angela, again, welcome, and I'll hand it over to you.
All righty. Thank you, Stephanie, so much. And thank you to the Rotary Clubs for putting this event together. I am Angela Davis, and I'm here at NPR News. I'm happy to be here tonight to help facilitate this discussion as we learn more about human trafficking, how it happens, how to spot it, the harm it causes, and what we can do to prevent it. Again, I'm here tonight to just get the conversation going and to link our guests, our speakers together. We do have 4 speakers, and when they are done, I will be passing along the questions that you have submitted in the Q&A box. So go ahead and write those questions in the Q&A, and we will get to as many of them as we can after all the speakers have had a chance to deliver their remarks. Again, that will come at the end of the program. I want to introduce the speakers we have with us, and so we have 4 of them. If you could go ahead and turn on your cameras just so we could see you and let everybody can see who you are. We have a Detective Paul Kroshus with us, and Paul is a detective with the Woodbury Police Department. He's also a member of the East Metro Human Trafficking Task Force. Paul is an expert in victim-centered trafficking investigations. Hi, Paul. And we also have with us a Cynthia Terlouw. Cynthia goes by CeCe, and she is the founder and executive director of Terebinth Refuge, and that is a place of hope and healing for sex trafficked and exploited women. Hello, Cynthia. Also, we have Eleana Lukes with us. Eleana is a trafficking survivor, a case manager, and a crisis advocate there at Terebinth Refuge Shelter, and that is a place that offers holistic healing to women of sex trafficking. So glad to have you with us, Eleana. And lastly, we have Jessica Bartholomew. Jessica is a retired police officer and the founder, as well as executive director of Anti-Child Trafficking United. And that is a Minnesota nonprofit providing youth exploitation prevention and leadership programs in schools and churches. Hello, Jessica. All right, each one of them is going to speak for about 10 minutes or so to give us some insight into the work that they are doing. And we're going to start with Paul. And Paul, I want you to share with us, tell us about investigating human trafficking, what that's like as a law enforcement officer, and how this became a focus of your work.
Yeah, so my name is Paul Kroshus. I'm with the Woodbury Police. I also am assigned to the East Metro Human Trafficking Task Force. I've been in law enforcement for over 21 years. Majority of that time now has been as an investigator. So I've worked in the drug task forces. I've worked in a special investigative unit and street crime unit here in the city of Woodbury. And then in 2016, so we're in 5 years now, I've been doing human trafficking as my full-time assignment, which is kind of it initially started for us as a partnership between the chief of police for Woodbury and then the county attorney's office, just trying to look at and examine is human trafficking, is this something that's going on in our community? If it is going on in our community, how is it that we can best address it, and try to confront that. It didn't take very long at all with the experimental, I guess, start to it to realize that it is definitely something going on. The cases that we had in, 2015 and prior was virtually none. And, after about a year of doing it, we had over 20 cases that were won. So we definitely found that's kind of what it is. This is everywhere. When you look at the old days of what you think for, prostitution, you think of people going to different specific areas of a city, more of the urban area, like the Lake Street in Minneapolis or University Avenue in St. Paul. There's certain, areas that were referred to as tracts. People would go there looking for commercial sex. With the evolution of the internet, the online availability for, sex buyers to meet with and connect with sex sellers, it kind of branched out everywhere. So, the environment and the reality of where we're at right now is just simply everywhere. And it either works that sex seller will go to where the sex buyer is, and that can be anywhere in the metro, it can be anywhere outstate, or it can be the reverse, where the sex buyers are going to where the sex sellers are. So we really do see kind of a transient nature to this crime. It's not something that just impacts one city or just one area. It's in our state, Minnesota, it's more focused, I'd say, in the metro because there's more people here, but then it spirals outstate as well. So we'll see people move around from maybe they're in Woodbury this day, and then they're over in Eagan, and they're in Rochester, back up in Bloomington, over to St. Cloud, up in Duluth, back into Minneapolis, and so on. So, there's definitely a global nature that needs to kind of look at this. And so we've created partners with, some federal agencies, other local agencies here in the metro to try to really go at this. And really the way we look at it is kind of an ecosystem. So if you look at the demand, which are the sex buyers that are out there, they really fuel this. If there's no people out there buying sex, then there's not going to be people out there selling it. So part of our approach to this is to address that demand. If we can do what we can to, let these sex buyers know that we're out here, we're running operations to try to bring them in as well. That helps push some of that stuff down, helps educate some of these sex buyers that they're more interested in the fantasy of their sexual experience and not really even wanting to think about the reality of the situation that a lot of the people that are selling sex are in. The other side of it is the supply side. That's the sex workers that are out there. Dominantly, we see them as younger females, but we've had many cases as well that involve males. So it really kind of goes across all lines. And then the distribution side, which is our main focus, is really that trafficker. Those people that are out there that are recruiting some of these young people in to sell themselves. They're out there promoting their prostitution, moving them around, kind of collecting money and really kind of controlling the situation. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that through kind of a false guise of relationship. The boyfriend that kind of turns into a pimp. And we also see a lot of it through drug addiction. So you have the heroin, and the meth that's out there, and obviously other drugs as well. And those drugs and that drug addiction becomes a control point for a trafficker to use that against an individual to coerce them into kind of doing what they want them to do. So, that's kind of this global ecosystem that we look at as to, what we try to address. We want to make sure when we're really looking at this that we kind of see it, that there's all these different angles of it. We can't just simply focus on sex buyers. We can't just simply focus on sex sellers, and we can't just focus on the sex traffickers. We have to kind of really focus on everything, and the goal is to hold people accountable and get this to stop the best that we can, at least through law enforcement interventions. So the one different approach that we've taken probably over the last over 5 years at least is kind of a victim. We refer to it as a victim-oriented approach towards the sex sellers. So when we do run into, prostitution is still a crime in the state of Minnesota. So when we run into some of these young people that are out there in this lifestyle, the goal is not to arrest them, but rather try to see, what can we do to get them out of a particular environment. If they're in an unsafe situation, if they're being trafficked, we want to do what we can to plug them into the right resources so we can try to, help them move in a better direction, as well as if there is a trafficker. And I'll say that not every person that's out there involved in prostitution has a trafficker. There are many that are out there that are just kind of doing their own thing independent as well. And it's not that those people don't need resources too. So when we do run across these individuals, we try to plug them in. We have pretty good partnerships and relationships with our advocacy groups for housing and different types of resources around here. A lot of them are through the county social services, and then we have other ones that are non-government. So we'll try to plug them in through that. So that victim-oriented approach has been really helpful for us to try to move forward and really get things kind of going in the right direction for everybody. Another part of it is we don't get these crimes reported to us. It's very common that these are unreported. If you look at our numbers and what we had going on as far as activity prior to the proactive looking into these types of cases, it was essentially nothing. And to go from that to over 20 in a really short amount of time just kind of shows how underreported this crime is. We've seen a lot of that is that the victims don't want to refer to themselves as a victim. They don't want to identify with themselves as a victim. And so it just doesn't simply get reported to us. So, our cases that we do find are in most part over 90% proactively found. And a lot of what we do to kind of examine that again is going back to this marketplace. The marketplace is kind of everywhere. It's online. There's different applications on phones. There's a lot of different ways that people can be out there advertising. And we look at that. We monitor those. We try to identify who we can, and if we find somebody that we can associate a trafficker to, then we kind of specifically will focus on that, bring them out, and then with that victim-oriented approach, a lot of times we can get some of these individuals on our side to give us a statement, give us some level of cooperation, and then as far as the investigative side of it, a lot of what we do is forensic based, and with that, our essential goal is to try to take that burden away from the victim. So if you think of a lot of crimes, there's a suspect that violates somebody, commits some level of crime. The victim reports that crime to law enforcement, cooperative with law enforcement, giving a statement saying what happened and what their experience is. We find with these crimes, it's very much not the case. We don't get these reports. People don't really want to talk to us. And we want to find other ways, and there's kind of a forensic examination that we can do. There's lots of other evidence that we're able to get. So our goal is really to try to get that type of evidence to move this case forward, where that statement is not, and that this whole case isn't necessarily just purely dependent on the victim. So there's a whole lot of things that I can go on and on about, but I just wanted to at least get a little bit of the initial side of what we do, where we kind of started, and kind of how we've evolved over the last 5+ years, and really what our goals are. So I will pass it on.
All right, thank you, Detective Paul Kroshus there with the Woodbury Police Department. I was going to give you your 1-minute warning, but you wrapped it up. Thank you, Paul. Next, I want to talk to CeCe. CeCe, tell us more about what happens there at Terebinth Refuge. CeCe, are you there? Let's see. Cynthia, it looks like your mic is still muted. Okay, I'm going to wait and see if we can get Cynthia there. Cynthia, are you able to turn your camera on and unmute your microphone? Okay. I'm kind of in the dark on what to do. Oh,
I need to go to
I see you.
Eleana.
Oh, you
Okay.
relocated. Okay.
Yes, I'm not sure what was happening, but I actually had some
We can
issues going
see.
on.
Yeah, we can see and hear you now. Again, this
Okay.
is Cynthia Terlouw, who is there at Terebinth Refuge. You're the executive director there. For folks who have not heard of Terebinth Refuge, I had not until this program. Tell us about the work that you do there.
Yes. Thank you so much, Angela.
Work it together.
Terebinth Refuge is a shelter and transitional home, and we are serving women 18 years and older who have been sexually exploited and or trafficked. And just very quickly, sexual exploitation is the umbrella, and that can happen with two people. So that can look like pornography, that can be survival sex, meaning having to trade sex for things of value like a place to stay, food, drugs, all of those kinds of things. And then so that can be two people. With trafficking, it's always three. And so you're talking about the victim, the buyer, and then also the trafficker or the pimp, the person who's exploiting and getting the money. So at Terebinth Refuge, we are working with women 18 years and older, and we do have room for a mom with a small child. In Minnesota, we passed the Safe Harbor Law in 2011, and that law said that any youth that is found trafficked or exploited should be treated as a victim and not a criminal. So we were changing the mindset of some of the past thinkings about young people involved in that. Along with that, our legislature allowed a group of us in the Twin Cities that were part of the Human Trafficking Task Force to put together and to work on a system of care in Minnesota. And that has become the Safe Harbor, No Wrong Door model. And so I was under that model, was able to open a program for teen girls under the Heartland Girls Ranch called the Hearts for Freedom. Well, fast forward, I really recognized that as we did Safe Harbor work in the state, you know, really good work, a lot of programs open for youth and services, that there really was very little for adult women. And so I really felt led through my faith and just knowing that's where I was to go, that I needed to start a program for women 18 years and older. And so in 2016, Terebinth Refuge started, but we actually opened our doors in 2018. Most people could not even fathom what these women have had to endure and the barriers they face in getting out. So I just want you for a minute to think about, imagine that you are 25 years old and that you have been trafficked since you were like 14. And now sometimes the mindset when someone is an adult is, well, you're an adult now, you need to grow up and you need to get out of that and you need to get a job. But what people don't understand is by the time you have been exploited and trafficked for that long, the barriers are just so steep. So just imagine trying to get a job. How would you fill out an application? You've missed schooling, you've had no support in that area. How would you fill that out? What would you put on the line that says, what jobs have you had? How can you even look someone in the eye and interview when you feel so low? And so the women that we're dealing with have by that time extreme mental health issues, very common for the women we work with to have PTSD, anxiety, depression. They've had so much trauma that has just piled on them. And then chemical dependency is very common for the women that we serve. We know that some women use chemicals to cope with what they have to do day in and day out. Others, sometimes the traffickers will actually put the women on drugs to keep them coming back. Another barrier is criminal records. Most of the women that we work with have all sorts of criminal records because their trafficker has forced them to steal or to, drugs has been a pretty common record, just a lot of different criminal records that are a barrier for them. The trauma bond that these women can come with, and that's like that Stockholm syndrome where they think, this guy, well, he loves me, but yet he beats me. And it's that attraction and that need to stay with them and that loyalty that some people just don't understand because this was built into them. so their lack of self-worth, being told that this is all you're good for, no one could ever want you, hearing those messages regularly. And then some of the women we work with have children, and some of them have lost their children to the system. And there's others who might have a small child and they're scared to turn themselves in because they know someone will probably take their child away. So there's all these barriers these women come with. So at Terebinth Refuge, we use holistic services to bring healing to the women that we serve. We know that without healing body, mind, soul, and spirit, the whole person, the chances of them getting out permanently out of the life is very slim. And the chances of dying a early death of disease, of drug overdose, of suicide, or homicide is also very big. So we really focus on body, mind, soul, spirit. Body being physical health. We have an RN who is taking care of the needs there and making sure they're getting the referrals they need, and doing wellness education. And then there's mind, which is the mental health, very critical. So we have trauma therapists. We do a lot of very important groups to help the women learn skills about healthy boundaries, those kinds of things. And then when we talk about soul, that's about all those individual skills, talents, abilities that women have. And we want them to discover where their gifts are. So a lot of that is about employment readiness. It's about education. It's about recreation and leisure. And then when we talk about spirit, we are a Christian organization, but we recognize very much that women have been forced, coerced, and required to do things, and we do not do that at Terebinth Refuge. We will not force them to do Christian programming, but we offer opportunities, and we really approach them as individuals who, as we see Christ, accepting people right where they're at. So those services are very critical. People often wonder how women come to us. And so we do have here in central Minnesota, investigative trafficking task force, and they're out on the streets and also investigating many of the crimes that are going on in this area. And so they are seeing these women on the streets. And so they will encourage them to come to Terebinth Refuge. Sometimes women aren't ready. Again, it's a huge step when they come to us. It's a very huge step. There's fear, there's all of those barriers that I talked about, where they truly don't feel they can ever leave this life, that this is what they're destined for. So the investigative trafficking task force will bring women to us. The safe harbor system has navigators around the state, and those are point people in different regions of the state, and they will often come in contact with an adult woman and refer her to us. We have a lot of self-referral. So we have a crisis card that only has our crisis number and our tree, which is our logo on it. We don't want any woman to ever be caught with a card that actually says this is a shelter, because she could get beat for that. And so we have a card, and those cards are handed out by a lot of collaborative partners. So we work with some of the pregnancy resource centers, some of the mental health, adult protection, just about a lot of the service providers in our community that are willing to have those cards available and to let women know when they come across trafficked and exploited women that we are here and we will help and serve their needs. I know that people often want to know how they can help. And one thing I really want to say, we talked about how children had to, with getting the safe harbor law started, we really had to overcome the idea, well, those are just bad little kids, and that's what they want to do. Now we have a better idea about how children are groomed and pulled into this life. Now we want to see adults as victims, and that they too have come through a lot of very difficult situations. So I always encourage people to really treat them with the dignity they deserve. And I know we've been in situations where we've seen people not do that. And these women read very clearly how people are seeing them, and often are really struggle because they are looked down upon. And so I would encourage people to, if you come across a victim or you have opportunity to serve a victim in some way, I would really encourage you in that way. And there's so many things you can do. You can get involved with a service provider by giving of your talents and skills, teaching skills, and We have a lot of volunteers who teach all kinds of things, from exercise programming to quilting to gardening to anything that maybe someone will latch on to and really learn about themselves, that this is something they're interested in. And just being able to give, if you have the opportunity to be able to give someone a second chance in a job, that is another area that is really a good way that people can come alongside, in kind and financial donations. So that's what we do at Terebinth Refuge.
Yeah. You did a nice job. I was going to say, if we can start wrapping up. And I know that, again, Cynthia Terlouw there at Terebinth Refuge, where she is the executive director. And you and our next panelist, Eleana Lukes, you're in the same place, right?
And
so
I'm going to move so she
I'm
can.
going to give you a couple of seconds to make your transition.
Okay. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. We'll have more questions for you at the end of the program. And just to remind folks about Eleana as she gets settled there. Hello. Eleana is a trafficking survivor, as well as a case manager now and a crisis advocate at Terebinth Refuge Shelter. And Eleana, just to get us started, you're a survivor. And so you have a personal story of how you became involved in this lifestyle. And I just get us started with telling us about the beginning for you.
Thank you so much. So I met my trafficker when I was 12 years old. I was living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am a child of an alcoholic and a child of an addict, so I was very high risk. My mom struggled with drugs, so by the time I had turned into my teens, I had actually been in every single locked facility across the state of Minnesota. And when I met my trafficker, I was seeking different kinds of support and validation that I hadn't gotten as I was growing up. So over the course of 6 months, my trafficker spent a lot of time giving me compliments and providing me with basic needs, with money, showering me with gifts and expensive presents. Over that 6-month period of time, he gained my trust. After he gained my trust, he introduced me to some of his family members, kind of just to solidify that relationship that he was building with me. After the 6-month period, he had taken me to a family reunion, and I had spent time with some of his uncles and aunts from his extended family. About 2 weeks later after that, he told me that one of the uncles that I had spent time with at the family reunion had died, and asked if I would go with him to St. Louis, Missouri to the funeral. I told him that he would have to ask my mom, and he did. And my mom said that I could go. So I packed a bag and I got in the car and I went with him. About 2 hours after we were on the freeway, he pulled off and took me into a gas station and told me to come inside. I got in the gas station with him and he told me to strip and turn around. Once I did, he beat me from the top of my neck to the back of my ankles with wire hangers until I was bloody. He told me that he was a pimp and that I would never see my family again, and he threw me in the trunk. I turned 13 in St. Louis, Missouri with him. He trafficked me across the United States from when I was 13, 14, 15, all the way until I was 19. When I was 19, in the process of that course, I had several interactions with police officers along the way. But when I was 19, some of the relationships that I had built with the police officers along the way had pursued me to start talking about what was happening. The longer I was with my trafficker, the more violent he got and the more that he beat me and drugged me. When I found the strength to reach out to the police officers and talk to them about what was really going on, they had me testify in front of a federal grand jury. After testifying in front of that federal grand jury, it came back with this 44-count indictment that named 15 ringleaders of a sex trafficking ring. When the leaders were named, it was found out that it was a multi-generational trafficking ring. So uncles, cousins, brothers, grandpa, working out of North Minneapolis for over 2 decades. It was the Evans family prostitution ring in Minnesota. Out of the 15 ringleaders, 7 of them were arrested right away, and they all pled guilty. They received sentences anywhere between 5 years to 10 years. The other members of the family went to trial. They ended up losing at trial, and they were all found guilty. My trafficker ended up getting 85 years in the federal prison. I'm one of the first children to get a federal conviction against their traffickers. I escaped by trusting some of the police officers that had contact with me over the years, but it took them a long time to build up trust, because while being trafficked, it had been instilled in me that the social and service industries were not going to help me. I had been groomed to think that my trafficker was the only one who cared, and that I didn't have any support on the outside. So it took a while for me to be able to escape that life. Once I was away from my trafficker, I still had no job skills. By that time, I was completely addicted to drugs, and I had been to prison several times. Currently, I'm a 5-time convicted felon. So as I was trying to transition out of that life, I still engaged in exploitation because I had no other skill set. The last time I got out of prison, I did go to Recovery Plus in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and I was able to go through their drug treatment program. That allowed me a platform to spend time at their transitional house, which was Journey Home. From there, I went to St. Cloud State University, and I obtained a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in family crisis intervention, and a master's certificate in addiction specialist. Currently at Terebinth Refuge, I work as the case manager and also the survivor advocate. I do a little bit of bridging the gap between chemical dependency and exploitation because I am a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. When it comes to who ends up being a victim or who is typically trafficked, that is going to be youths and individuals who are high risk. So many times the age of entry into the life is going to be anywhere between 12 and 14, but that age group is always underreported because there's a lot of victims that are yet to self-identify with what it is that's going on. So any individual who's involved in the life, it could be male or female, who is being exploited, can also be trafficked. Warning signs are going to be if you're meeting an individual who is constantly isolated, and then they're coming up with a lot of expensive things like telephones and jewelry, and they don't have a way to explain where they got the money from to buy those items. That sometimes can be warning signs. An individual who is dating a person who is in a very higher age group from them and not really wanting to make eye contact, or if you ask them a lot of questions, they're not giving you a lot of information. Those can be a warning sign for somebody who is potentially being trafficked or exploited and caught in the life. When it comes to what kind of advice I would have for those who are watching, the participants today, is just make sure that when you are online on social media and spending time on those platforms, that you're protecting yourself and protecting your identity, not giving away a lot of identifying information. For the youth or for the parents that have youth, is just making sure that your child or your teenager is not friending individuals that they don't know, or people that are not friends of the family, because it's a lot of way that traffickers are getting in now and earning trust, is being able to talk to those on social media and kind of put that presence on those social media networks and platforms. So just make sure that you're being aware of what it is that you're sharing online, and things of that nature is what I would have to say when it comes to advice that I would have for our participants.
All right, Eleana, I just want to tell you, I was trying to take notes as you were talking, and there's just so much there. I just want to, thank you for being open and willing to share your story, being so courageous, for being a survivor. I'm so happy that you're there at Terebinth Refuge, that that people get to meet you and hear you and see your story of survival, and that you're there to be an advocate for, young women who are in this lifestyle right now. And I'm just sort of in awe of everything that you've shared. And I know we're already getting a lot of comments there in the chat box. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll have many questions for you after our next speaker. That's Eleana Lukes there, who works also there at Terebinth Refuge Shelter. Our next speaker, thank you, Eleana. I want to bring in our next speaker. We have Jessica Bartholomew. As you recall during the introduction, Jessica is a retired police officer and the founder and executive director of the Anti-Child Trafficking United. And Jessica, I know you're all about awareness and educating people and families. And tell us more about, why you chose to leave law enforcement and run a nonprofit that gets, into the community and explains to people, share some of the stories like we just heard from Eleana about what is happening. Because I think so many of us are just ignorant. We have no idea.
Yeah, well, thank you. So my background is in working with youth and in law enforcement. So I have worked with children, teens, and in at-risk or vulnerable populations and communities for over 25 years in different capacities. And I was a police officer for 12 years. And half of that career was spent in plainclothes or undercover investigative units, mostly narcotics. And it was in narcotics that I came into cases of juvenile sex trafficking and other sexual exploitation crimes happening against children and teens, and even children as young as toddlers. So it does impact and affect all age groups. But I retired from law enforcement in 2014, and then it was a series of phone calls and events that happened that I ended up going back into anti-trafficking, anti-exploitation work in the nonprofit sector. So in 2015, I started a group, which is now a 501c3 nonprofit called Act United, which is our short name for Anti-Child Trafficking United. And we're based out of Chaska, Minnesota, but our work is across the state, into some other states, and as well as some work with some international partners overseas. Our mission is to unite communities together in awareness, prayer, and prevention to end the sexual exploitation and trafficking of children and teens. So we have a very specific lane and focus and mission that we stay in. And that is, our focus is on youth, and it is on prevention. Because we believe, and if anybody has heard me speak before, they've probably heard me say this a million times over, but we believe that we are not going to end the sexual exploitation and trafficking of children and teens by responding to it. We have to get ahead of it. We're only going to end it if we get ahead of it in prevention. Taking what we know, what we've learned, survivor expertise, our stories, and somebody's got to swim upstream and get ahead of it in prevention work. So that's what we do at Act United. So there's three things that we do in our model of prevention, because awareness is just the first step. It's information. And the key to effect prevention is, what do you do with that information? So the three things that we do, number one, is we bring people together to the table, and we bring people together to the work. We unite and equip our professionals and youth services communities, making sure that they have the information, they know the signs and indicators, they know best practices for response, and importantly, how do we all work better together? That's how we're really going to make an impact, as well as when we know each other and we work better together. So that's one thing we do. The second thing is to educate and equip parents and families so that they have the information that they need to have the conversations, have the resources, have the tools to speak with their own kids and kids in their family and in their community. What are resources for parents? And what do they need to know? So professionals, and then parents and families. And then the third thing that we do, which is so important and really our passion and our focus, which is to educate and empower youth. Because youth are the ones that are targeted for these sexual exploitation crimes. So that makes them the front lines. They're the ones that need to have the information, the resources, the connections and relationships within their own communities and within helping them build their own network of trusted adults and people and places. And that's how they are going to be better able to make those better decisions, healthier life choices and decisions, as well as know who to go to if harm does occur. So empowering youth is kind of our lane and our focus in prevention work. So we developed a curriculum 4 years ago called Youth Aware, which is a teen exploitation prevention curriculum. And we've been in a couple dozen middle schools, high schools, college campuses, churches, and other youth organizations over the last couple of years with this program. And before we talk about what makes for successful prevention education, we have to talk about what is happening. What do we see happening? Because it's accurate information that's going to lead to effective solutions. So I wanted to highlight 4 things that we know about what's happening. And number 1 is that the 2 fastest growing crimes against minors or against youth right now, one is sexual exploitation online in the form of sextortion, which is the explicit photo and video sharing and child pornography, and sex trafficking. So there are 2 exploitation crimes targeting kids that they are vulnerable to. The second thing is something that was already mentioned tonight, which is it used to be about 1 in 4. Now we're starting to see anywhere from 79–80% of youth are first meeting that predator or that trafficker online on social media platforms, chat groups, online chat groups, as well as dating websites. So this has transitioned into more of that online initial contact crime. The third thing I wanted to mention is that the 2019 Minnesota Department of Health Student Survey, which goes out to our Minnesota students, I think every 3 years this survey goes out as an assessment of kind of overall assessment of student health in our state. And in 2019, they added a question about sexual exploitation, and they released the findings of that survey last year in 2020. And it found that we have at least 5,000 students in Minnesota that have been a victim of at least one form of sexual exploitation. And it also found that the youth that reported being a victim of having experienced this form of sexual exploitation came from every region in our state. So whether it was up north or the Twin Cities or southern Minnesota. And it also found no statistically significant difference in rates between students that identified as male and female. So these are crimes that are impacting all genders, as well as all ethnicities and all communities across our state. And number 4 that I wanted to highlight is that the number 1 pathway for youth into sexual exploitation, both online and sex trafficking, is through relationships. Less than 10% of sex trafficking of juveniles or people under the age of 18 starts with a kidnapping situation. So that means 90% or so the pathway that leads into trafficking is through a relationship, or those predatory relationships that are leading to that isolation, control, abuse, and then exploitation or even trafficking. So if we know that about what is happening, successful prevention education needs to do a couple of things. Number one is it needs to address both online sexual exploitation as well as sex trafficking. We need to be inclusive, and we need to be representative of everybody that can be affected by this crime or is at risk of these crimes. So our language and our training and our prevention work, our youth work, speaking to kids, we need to have inclusive language, and we need to represent everybody that may be at risk or has already been impacted when we're teaching or talking. And number three is to have education and discussions, interactive discussions. We have fantastic discussions with youth in our programs about healthy relationships and about versus the signs, the indicators, the red flags, like what are those behaviors in our relationships, our online and our in-person relationships that may be leading or grooming us toward abuse or exploitation. They have to be able to identify that. So our program, Youth Aware, does that, as well as has a track, a leadership track for students that want to help develop their skills and their leadership skills. And what can people do to help? Invest in prevention so it doesn't happen in the first place, and invest in kids. Your kids, your family, kids in the community, be aware of what's happening and invest quality time with our kids, because that's how we're going to reduce the risk and reduce vulnerability. So thank you.
Jessica, thank you. And we will have an opportunity to get more information out of you during our question and answer period, which we're at right now. Again, that's Jessica Bartholomew, who is the Executive Director of Anti-Child Trafficking United. So let's get to some of the questions that are already appearing there in the box. You guys are doing a great job of writing in what you want to know more about. Again, we're going to get to as many of them as we can. We're running a little ahead of schedule, so hopefully we can get to most of them. And I want to start this first couple of questions, I think are best for you, Paul, our detective there at the Woodbury Police Department. And so, Paul, there's a question that says, can you speak to the impact of the pipeline on trafficking and addressing the disproportionate impact to Native women? So Detective, let me get your last name right here, Kroshus. Yes, Detective Kroshus. Can you speak to that? Someone is asking about the disproportionate impact to Native women. Is that the case?
Are you talking about the pipeline stuff going on up north?
Or statewide, or what do we see if we just look at Indigenous communities or Indigenous women? What can you tell us about that as it pertains to human trafficking?
Yeah, I mean, I've partnered and worked with Northern Minnesota as the Trust Task Force, which is tribal police that are working together in partnership. I don't know that I'm the best to answer that. I don't have any direct experience. I don't work up in that Northern Minnesota area. I can say that when we do have trafficking victims, they do span all races. The sex buyers that we encounter span all races. The traffickers span all races. So I mean, there's really kind of an impact on everybody. But if this question is specific to kind of something that's going on in Northern Minnesota, I don't know that I would be the best person to answer that.
I think the question was just even here within the Twin Cities. So you're saying what you're seeing in the East Metro task force that you're in, are you seeing a disproportionate number of Native women, or no?
We don't here in the East Metro group. The state group, the BCA has a task force with the state police. They kind of cover that Minneapolis, West Metro, St. Paul area. There's a group up in St. Cloud, and then there's the Trust Task Force, which is specifically made up of tribal police. It is in that community. There's no doubt. We worked with them before. We've done some operations there. But But as to get into specifics and really answer the question appropriately, I don't know that I'm the best to do that, because I don't want to give incorrect information.
Well, let me ask you another question. And this is about language. And this question is, what is the difference between trafficking and prostitution? Is it just language, or does human trafficking, does it mean something different than prostitution?
So the prostitution itself is what's essentially the criminal code for trading anything of value in exchange for a sexual act. And so a sexual act, as defined in Minnesota, can be really anything from full sex to different forms of sex acts to what would be considered the hand job if you're looking at some of the stuff that happens in illicit massage parlors. And some of that as well can even extend to if you're having another individual engage in a sex act at your direction and you're trading something of value for it. And most of the time people will think that value trade is money. That's mostly what people want, in that, but there's also trade for, drugs. There's trade for, sometimes property or whatnot. But for the most part, it's money. But really anything of value is what prostitution is. Trafficking is, really in line with the promotion of prostitution. So the state of Minnesota, we are very fortunate in the trafficking laws that we have here. So we have promotion of prostitution, which is essentially you're in any way promoting the prostitution of another person, and that can include transportation. So if I am a trafficker and I drive somebody from point A to point B for the purpose of prostitution, that is promotion under our laws. It's also trafficking. The way those two crimes are worded in statute is very, very similar. They kind of go hand in hand. When it comes to the enforcement side of it, on promotion of prostitution versus trafficking, a lot of times what we do as far as like the criminal charges is, can we prove that coercion? And that's a really, really big thing that I'm glad this question is here, because in the state of Minnesota, in order for me to charge somebody, arrest them, and potentially convict them for sex trafficking, for promotion of prostitution, I do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. If you look at the federal code, the federal statutes that are out there, there are some other states where they do have to prove that force, fraud, coercion. In Minnesota, we don't. We have to prove knowledge and intent, but we don't have to prove some of those other elements. So a lot of times we'll reserve that sex trafficking charge for somebody that's that true pimp, that true trafficker. We do have that evidence. And if I'm honest, and for the most part, in a lot of the cases, in fact, most of the cases that I work, it's there. I mean, it's there. We can prove it. But the upside for our state is we just don't have to. Which in all the work that everybody in this panel is doing, we're all very fortunate that Minnesota does have really good laws related to these crimes.
All right, thank you, Paul. This next question is for you there, CeCe, and it's about the work that you're doing there at Terebinth Refuge. So first question, what is the average length of stay for a survivor at your program? How long do you all work with someone, or how long can they stay with you if they need a place to stay?
We don't put a limit on the time of stay, but I would say an average stay is about 1.5 years to really go through the full process. We have 4 phases. It's not that each woman necessarily has to go through all phases, because we have had women who've left earlier than that and have felt like they've gotten what they've needed and have gone on to be stable in their community. But it is usually about 1.5 years is what we have experienced.
Another question about Terebinth Refuge. Do you take any women, anyone who's being exploited? And does the victim need to be clean from drugs before staying there? Because you and Eleana both talked about, all of you have talked about, the addiction to drugs, that can be a very complicating factor in this.
Yes, we take any woman that has experienced exploitation or trafficking, and no, we don't. If a woman has, most of the women coming in have had drug issues or have been dependent. We're very careful to screen to make sure they aren't in need of inpatient treatment, because we aren't an inpatient treatment, but we do give the women opportunity to do outpatient.
And Eleana, can I ask you to speak to that and just talk about, the impact of being, addicted to drugs and what that does in terms of making it very difficult to get out of that lifestyle, and how that can be such a powerful tool for, someone who is forcing someone into this lifestyle. Eleana?
So chemical dependency and exploitation is very interconnected. On one hand, a trafficker will use drugs to control a victim. Therefore, she's more compliant. They will forcefully drug her up. And that just makes her easier to control and to be more submissive and to cause less chaos. On the opposite side, if you have a trafficker who does not force a woman to be under the influence, many times living in that lifestyle, you use the drugs to self-medicate, to escape, to be able to numb the emotions that you're going through because of what it is that you're experiencing while being trafficked and exploited.
While I have you there, Eleana, I want to pass on some comments from some members of the audience. They wanted to say to you, Eleana, you are amazing. Thank you for coming forward, for your courage to come forward. I applaud your strength and for what you've done since. Eleana, God bless you. You're amazing. Your strength, your insights, your knowledge and energy serve you well in helping others. Keep up the great work. Eleana, thank you for sharing your story. You're amazing. And I'm amazed at the positive changes you have made in your life. So it must be very powerful when someone meets you to talk to someone who's on the other side, who has been through the horror and has come out of it and is now living a very different life. Can you speak to just how powerful it is to, as a case manager when you're working with young women?
A lot of the times, unfortunately, I bond with these women through trauma, and that is our beginning platform. However, by them being able to see somebody who has felony convictions, somebody who has a lack of education in the beginning part of her lifestyle, to be able to make it to the opposite side is it produces hope. It also shows them that it's real. I've had a lot of obstacles during my path and be able to gain employment because of my criminal history. But once I got the educational platform underneath me, then I was able to have a voice a little bit louder than when it was silenced. I give the women a lot of support. I totally understand where they're coming from when it comes to battling through those obstacles, and try to get the community to believe in you, because there's so much of a stigma surrounding exploitation and trafficking, or even when they say prostitution, as if this was a choice that we just woke up in the morning and decided that's what we wanted to do. That's not the case by any means. So first of all, being able to get the community to step back from those stigmas and accept you as a person for who you really are is a barrier in itself. So by me being able to make those connections in the community and let people hear my voice and see my face, it's very powerful for the women, because I can come alongside them and support them as they transition from victim to survivor leaders.
The expression, if you can see it, you can believe it. So by seeing you, they can believe that can be an outcome for them as well. Right.
Absolutely.
All right, I want to throw a question to Jessica. Jessica, a question for you. The work you're doing in educating the community, what would it take to get an anti-trafficking program into the Mounds View School District, into the schools? You work with schools and churches. Jessica, are they open to having you come in and talk about this very sensitive topic?
Yeah, we've been incredibly fortunate, because we were in the schools providing programs by being asked by teachers in the Minneapolis school district because of having relationship there. So once our program got into the Minneapolis school district, then word kind of spread. And so we really didn't do any promotion of it. It was really just teacher to teacher. So the introduction of our program to your school, your local school, and being the bridge to connect with us. And then we have the curriculum outline as well as testimonials from students and teachers. I'll say your best contact person in the school district would be the staff that work directly with youth. It's going to be your school social worker, your school psychologist, your school counselor. It's going to be the health teacher. It's going to be those staff that are most likely to have had conversations with their students that are struggling even with exploitation. And then once they learn that we do have a tool that's available in the staff that can help with this, they usually are like, we just needed the tool. We knew we had the issue with our students. We just needed the tool that we could trust to bring in. So yeah, the information for it is on our website too, actunited.org. So you can learn more about the program and just build the bridge to your school or church.
Another question, it really gave me chills hearing you talk about some of the online platforms and how, the first contact, how, these people, these predators are trying to initiate contact with young people, particularly, teenagers. Another question is, what are the danger signs that a teenager should be aware of as they are interacting with friends or new friends? Particularly, living through this pandemic, there's been so much social isolation, and kids are spending so much time online and trying to be in group chats. How do you talk to your teenager about, okay, I want you to look out for this, that this could be a problem, or this could be someone who's not quite who they seem to be?
Yeah, so we actually, since the pandemic and actually since March of 2020, when shelter in place and online school took effect, we saw an increase in sexual exploitation online. And we're also seeing an increase with students that are building their dating relationships, their social life, like everything has transitioned to be more online right now. Sometimes parents ask, what are the platforms that I need to really watch out for? And my response is whatever's popular, because it transitions and it changes. Snapchat and Instagram are really big that we hear right now from students. And we can talk about some signs and things to look out for, but unfortunately, what is also happening is just the direct questions. Students are being DM'd or messaged and just saying, hey, I will pay you to send a photo of your chest or of you nude. You don't even have to have your face in it. And predators are just being that direct and that blunt. And what's so interesting is students don't really report it to their parents. They just kind of say, yeah, I ignored it or I blocked or whatever. So having those open conversations about our devices and our social life and who we're talking to, and if we make it a common practice to just have open conversations, then it's less awkward or weird to all of a sudden kind of be like, hey, is there anybody creepy on your Instagram? But if we just kind of keep those open conversations going, youth gaming and social media and dating websites are the three things to really pay attention to. And asking for sexually explicit photos, asking for personal information, wanting to send money or gifts, offering to send money or gifts, those same kind of grooming behaviors that we would see in person. With younger children, we often see asking for a photo, asking about school, oh, what grade are you in? And we always tell kids, if you don't know this person in real life, you don't know them at all. Looking to transfer to other types of apps that allow for video or that allow for more privacy and communication. Wanting to transfer from, say, Fortnite to the cell phone texting form of communication. Asking to switch to Duo so that you can video chat, those kind of things.
There's a lot. Detective Kroshus, I will ask you too, Paul, if when you talk to parents who are seeking advice about, how do I talk to my kids about this? What are the warning signs that, we should make sure our kids are aware of? Paul, anything you would add to that? Like if people after listening to this conversation, I need to go talk to my kids and my grandkids. Any advice on how we should talk to our kids about how to educate themselves and be smart?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough and it's challenging. You want to have these conversations. You want to build this open relationship. You want to give your kids a certain amount of a leash, to get into social media. The risk you run if you shut everything down is that then everything goes in the closet and everything's done behind your back, and there's no open communications at all. And that makes things a lot more challenging. But it is. I was listening to what Jessica was saying. It's horrifying. It's scary. We see them all the time. I'm in the middle of an extensively large sextortion case that spans across the state and it spans across the country, really. When everything is done through Instagram, I've got exploitation cases that have started on Twitter. There's certain codes in Twitter for people put in their bios, and you recognize that, and next thing you know, you're connecting essentially young people who are willing to talk to old people and older people who are explicitly looking for young people, and then those conversations move into, just as Jessica said, Snapchat and that type of stuff, and those social media relationships, as kind of everyone has really said, is really kind of, that's the beginning. That is the dominant way that a person gets brought into trafficking. It is the boyfriend. It is that boyfriend relationship. It is that person who is seeking out somebody who is vulnerable, somebody that is potentially easy to exploit. And then once they realize that, yeah, this person is going to be it, then they flip that switch, and that horrific experience starts. So it's tough. We have to keep our kids informed and get them out of, or at least open relationships with their parents to talk about this stuff openly, to keep these strangers out and away, and openly talk about it so that they're educated and informed as to what some of these possible motives might be with these people.
A couple of law enforcement questions. I'll pass to you, Paul. Someone's asking, are these local individuals or are they coming from out of state? If they're coming from out of state, is there a location that is more of a hotbed for building a supply? And you kind of talked about this is happening everywhere, but is there any information about, is it, people locally who are preying, or do we get an out of state presence, or what would you say to that?
So are we talking in terms of the commercial sector itself, or the traffickers that are coming around? And I mean, for the most part, the recruitment, which is what we're talking about. It's not what you see in the movies. It's not the kidnapping and that type of stuff with the complete stranger. It's these relationships that are built, and once they get you to make that first trick, it's kind of the 4 T's, the target, which is targeting the right person, turning them, getting them to do that first trick, and then traumatizing them and traumatizing them over and over. Even when you look at the branding tattoos that some traffickers will put on their victims, that's a form of trauma. Is it as easy for a person to leave that trafficker when they're branded with a tattoo on their neck? The answer is probably no, it's not. It keeps them there. But as far as the location, it's really more probably going to be somebody that's local. It's going to be somebody that's going to be here closer in our community, that's going to probably recruit somebody in, and then they do travel. They travel out of state. I've had many cases that are traveling out of state. I won't get into the international cases where we have foreign nationals that are brought in and shipped all over the country, and Minnesota is a hotbed for that. There are definitely instances where you have somebody that maybe online is, let's say, out of Chicago, which is a close by large city, who may, through social media, recruit somebody to come in. They start communicating through Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and then get that person to come out. And I have worked a case here locally in the metro where that trafficker was here in the metro recruiting women from out of state, and then he put them on an airplane, fly them up, and put them to work. So I mean, it again, it's I don't know if that answers the question fully, but it really is. It's so transitory and everywhere that it's everywhere, I guess.
I have two more questions for you, Paul. If you believe your kid is in contact with a predator, what should you do? Who do you contact? Another question talks about, if someone reaches out to your child on social media asking for nude photos or saying they want to be their sugar daddy, how can we report it? So if you think something like, what do you do if you find some evidence at home, or if your kid says like, I have a problem, who do I call?
Yeah, police, you call, whoever your local police department is. There are ways we can, there's always the potential that somebody is taking every single necessary step to be anonymous. If you're always using, IP blockers and fake this and that and whatever, but these people that are out there preying on young people have to do everything perfect every single time they get online, right? People make mistakes, and that's where we're able to sometimes capitalize on that and identify who they are. So if you are finding some of this type of activity on young people's accounts or kids' accounts, one, thank your lucky stars that you've got a good enough relationship with your child that they're open enough to talk to you about that, because that is a huge first step in this fight, in this, with the exploitation. Have that conversation and call law enforcement. Let us collect the data that we can. What's the app? What's the usernames? When is the dates of activity? Sometimes people will even let victims hand us their phone, and we're able to do some forensics on it, where we're able to get some more data. And then, we can go from there, work in that case. But it is extremely important that you get that to law enforcement sooner rather than later, because evidence is that there's oftentimes an expiration date on evidence, and if we don't move earlier on, then sometimes that evidence can go away.
I want to ask this question. There's a question about boys. We've talked a lot about young women and girls. What do we know about boys, young men? Are they targeted? What can you tell us about them being, someone, also caught up in the same traps that we've seen young women or girls?
Yeah, they are, and we don't have as many of those cases, but I have had cases on when we talk. Let's if we put it in the here's the trafficking side of it. I have had cases that involve younger men. We've had cases that involve transgenders. We've had cases that involve high school aged young boys and transgenders and females. It really crosses it. The dominant majority of our cases are females, but they are definitely there, and all the same warning signs apply. When you talk about online exploitation, boys are just as much of a target as young girls. People, when we're having this conversation right now, a lot of people maybe would assume that we're talking explicitly or only about young females who are being targeted for online exploitation and sextortion. That's not true. There's a big target against high school age boys, and getting them to send some of those images, and with that threat of embarrassment, or if you don't do this and pay me this, then I'm gonna share this with everybody that is on your friend list.
And let me ask our other panelists this question too. CeCe, what can you tell us about what you've seen as far as, maybe, I know you work specifically with women, but what can you tell us about boys or teenagers or young men also being targeted? CeCe?
Well, I do have to just agree with what Paul has said, and that there is more of an increase now of boys and young men. They're harder to find, and there's not as many services because there's even more increased shame in that. And so we are aware and know that they are being targeted, just as Paul had spoken about. We at Terebinth Refuge aren't working with that population, but we do hear about and we do learn about the fact that this is becoming very prevalent as well.
And Eleana, I'll ask you too, you have any information about or stories that you've heard about boys or, teenagers, young men also being targeted?
Just agreeing with the rest of the collective bunch here today, they're underrepresented. A lot of people don't really have any facility yet for youth, men or boys, to go to in the state of Minnesota that I know of. And I'm not really sure about them across the United States, but that's something that it's definitely going to have to look out to expand those services to in the future.
And while I have you there, is Terebinth Refuge, is it the only recovery center for women in Minnesota who escaped being trafficked or who are trying to get out? That's another question we have.
So we have the Ambarella House down in Wyoming, Minnesota. They're also faith-based. They are ones that work with adult victims 18 and up. They have housing. You also have Breaking Free, which is in Ramsey County in St. Paul. Breaking Free works with adult victims of sex trafficking. They tend to have housing sometimes. And then you have Pride, which is a resource in the Minneapolis, Hennepin County area, but they do not have housing. A lot of the other facilities are focused on youth.
And Jessica, I want to give you an opportunity too, in case there's anything you can share with us about what we know about boys and young men when it comes to human trafficking, being targeted, working as sex workers. What can you share with us?
Yeah, when we developed our curriculum 4 years ago, one of the things that we noticed is that our language in the industry was about women and girls were trafficked, and then we started moving into women and children, and boys were still not represented in our programs very well. And what we know about boys, for one, is the largest child pornography case in Minnesota history actually started as online relationships that led to the sharing of sexually explicit photos with 171 high school boys, where a grown man set up 2 different fake profiles online as females and built relationships online with these high school guys, managed to get solicit sexual photos with them thinking they were in a relationship with a female, and then ended up under threat and pressure. We know that they sent 3,000 images, and 1,000 of those images were put on the dark web and into pornography sites. So that involved, our largest case in Minnesota was actually high school boys. And as far as trafficked boys go, there is underrepresentation and not a lot of research. But we do know from a New York study, 50% of trafficked minors in New York were males. And in 2016, the Department of Justice funded a study and found that 36% of trafficked minors in the United States were biological boys, or those that identified as male and were biological males. So when we have these conversations, even going back to online safety and relationship safety, it's just as important to be talking about those points with our boys as well as our girls, all genders, because like everybody has said, they are and can be, and they are targeted as well. And they do have barriers to disclosure that females don't have. So one of the reasons they're underrepresented is because of not reporting. And there are some gender specific barriers that males face, which limits or hinders them from coming forward and reporting. So we have to be careful in our language. If you're a young boy, for example, let's say you're 13, 14, 15 in school, and the guest speaker comes in to talk about human trafficking at school or in class, and the language of that training is women and girls can be victimized, you need to be careful. And boys, you need to treat women right because you're potential offenders or you're potential perpetrators, and you're that 13-year-old boy that is a victim of sex trafficking. That's very harmful and very furthers their isolation and fear of disclosure. So we need to make sure that we are very representative in how we talk to youth and everybody. So yeah.
I want to read a comment and a question here, our final one maybe. This person writes, I was in elementary school in the 1960s. Back then, students in 5th grade typically had sex education. I don't know what the curriculum is like now, but it seems to me that youth would benefit greatly from having the topic expanded to various aspects of personal safety. It could educate about how not to be a victim of various forms of abuse, also education to prevent youth from being the abusers. Important to educate for prevention. And why is this not talked about and investigated openly through media and news? That is a great question. I think in terms of the media, it's difficult to have these conversations. It's difficult to, have, to have, those relationships with, detectives like Paul, who would be willing to talk, about it. And, because of privacy, right? There's limited information probably that law enforcement can give about cases. And it's rare to find someone like, Eleana, who's willing to share the details of her personal story. So I think that is kind of why we don't hear more about it. What do you think about it, Jessica? Why this is not talked about more openly? We don't see more about it just, in media or just anywhere.
I think one is lack of education and awareness about the true facts. We still have that, not here, not me, not my family, not my community. And if I don't think it's here, it doesn't become an important topic. So it's not happening in this school district. Therefore, why are we even going to take away learning hours to go toward this topic, right? So that is kind of the biggest issue. I think one of the ways, one of the things that becomes helpful is also educating on successful prevention education, and that the context for a lot of that is within healthy relationships, and which is national education standards. I think if you come in and say, we're going to talk about human trafficking to your students, well, if you don't even know what it is, or don't have a little bit of relationship and explanation, that can be a barrier. So our program, for example, is exploitation prevention program, because it's addressing relationships and the online safety. So we've had a lot of invitation, I guess, into schools because of that. So it's kind of a catch-22 for me, because people think they don't need to learn more about it because it's not happening here. So it's hard to get them in the door to education so that they can understand and learn, well, it actually is happening everywhere.
It is happening here.
Kind of that catch-22 that we try to overcome.
Well, our time is up, but I have learned so much, and I hope that our audience has learned so much as well. And I want to thank all 4 of our speakers, all 4 of our panelists. You did a great job. I also want to thank the sponsors of this virtual event. I want to thank the Rotary Clubs of Arden Hills, Shoreview, and New Brighton, Mounds View. Thank you so much for pulling everybody together to have this important conversation. And I do want to reiterate what Stephanie said. I do plan to air a portion of this discussion during my 11 a.m. talk show here at NPR News. I don't have an air date at this time, but I'm confident it'll be on the radio within the next 2 weeks, and I'll make sure that we get that information out so that if anyone wants to share this or make sure they hear it again, or make sure someone they know hears it, I will get that information to you. You will be able to hear it here on NPR. So Stephanie, I'll hand the program back over to you now.
Angela, I just want to thank you. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you.
Oh, okay, fantastic. I want to thank you so much for being here with us and moderating. You did a fantastic job. Panelists, you did a fantastic job. We've learned so much. And to those who are in the audience, I hope that this evening inspired you to learn more, inspired you to take action, because truly we will not end human trafficking if we do not all unite and approach this together. So again, thank you everyone for attending, and have a great evening.